Okay, so we will proceed to borrowing cost. That's under PS 23. So borrowing costs are defined by PAS 23 as costs that are directly attributable to the acquisition, construction, or production of a qualifying asset, form part of the cost of that asset. So borrowing costs are, other borrowing costs are recognized as an expense. So only those that qualify as capitalizable borrowing costs will be added as part of the cost of the qualifying asset. And what is this qualifying asset? So it is an asset that necessarily takes a substantial period of time to be completed or to be ready for its intended use or sale. Because there are some assets that we cannot immediately um, have it finished, unlike if we bought it automatically, like finished na ang building. But what if we're still constructing the building or the plant or the uh, factory, so it will take substantial time. So depending on the circumstances, any of the following may be qualifying assets. So it could be an inventory, it could be manufacturing plants, power generation facilities, intangible assets, or investment properties measured under the cost model. So these will take substantial period of time, meaning dili siya dali-dali nga mahuman. But since ano man siya kanang dugay man siya complete, so of course it means that it will also entail large costs. So naagi siya dako nga gasto. And if the company cannot have enough available funds, so they're going to resort to borrowing. Di ba? Mangutang sila in order to fund the construction or the completion of the qualifying asset. And because there's borrowing and nangutang man ta, so there would be interest cost. So that's why nga naatay gitawag nga borrowing cost. So the borrowing costs are interest and other costs incurred by an entity in connection with the borrowing of funds. It may include interest expense calculated using the effective interest method. It could be finance charges in respect of finance leases, or it could be exchange differences arising from foreign currency borrowings to the extent that they are regarded as an adjustment to the interest cost. But in short, mao ni siya ang interest sa pagpangutang nato. Ang pagpangutang is related to the construction of the qualifying asset. But remember nga dili tanan nga borrowing cost or interest charges, finance charges, or kaning exchange differences will be added to the asset being constructed or sa qualifying asset. Because again, di ba, there are also other borrowing costs that will be recognized immediately as expense. So, unsa na may ma-appeal? So, kato ra pong directly gyud sa pagama atong building or atong construction, and naam na siya criteria wherein you will learn later on. So what are not qualifying assets? So 'di ba mentioned earlier that these will be qualifying asset if they take substantial period of time to get ready for its intended use. But there are also other forms of asset that are not qualified. So, for example, you have financial assets and inventories that are manufactured or otherwise produced over a short period of time. So, it's not qualified asset. Kaya of course, it does not take a long period of time man to complete. Assets that are already ready for their intended use or sale when acquired, they are not qualifying asset. Kung finished product na siya, readily available na, so wala na siya labot. Assets that are routinely manufactured or otherwise produced in large quantities on a repetitive basis, and also assets measured at fair value, they do not qualify as qualifying asset. So when do you start the capitalization? So remember what is capitalization, di ba? When you add it to the asset or it is included as part of the cost of the asset. So, you will capitalize the borrowing cost, or kung sa building pa na siya, you're going to add the borrowing cost to the building when all of the following conditions are met. So first, so remember ha, all, so dapat kaning silang tanan present. The entity incurs expenditures for the asset. There is also borrowing costs that are incurred, and it undertakes activities that are necessary to prepare the asset for its intended use or sale. And then when are you going to suspend? Suspend the capitalization. So the capitalization of borrowing costs shall be suspended during extended periods of suspension of active development of a qualifying assets, which means that if masuspend sa dang activities para mahuman ang imong qualifying asset, so pwede kang mag-suspend sad sa capitalization. Capitalization, however, is not suspended if substantial technical and administrative work is being performed, or there's only a temporary delay which is necessary part of the development process. So again, dili siya makonsider as suspended ang capitalization if there's only a temporary delay. For example, capitalization of borrowing costs is not suspended when construction is temporarily stopped due to a typhoon, because kaliyo raman ng typhoon dili man gina siya for very long period, gina siya ang duration. Then when do you cease? Meaning, when do you stop capitalizing the borrowing costs? So when substantially all the activities necessary to prepare the qualifying asset for its intended use or sale are complete. So meaning, nahuman na o gama ang asset. So if the construction of a qualifying asset is completed in parts, capitalization ceases for each part that is completed and ready for its intended use. Then capitalization continues for the uncompleted parts. So how do we determine the borrowing cost that can be capitalized? So saan na to pag-compute nga para ma-add siya sa ato ang asset. For example, sa building, ma-add siya sa ato ang building. So you need to know if the borrowing is specific or general. So kung specific, meaning the funds borrowed are specifically for the purpose of obtaining a qualifying asset. Meaning, ang pagpangutang, ang reason jud sa pagpangutang is para magpagama sa qualifying asset. So, that is what we refer to as the specific borrowing. So, how do we compute? So, the formula would be the capitalizable borrowing cost is equivalent to the actual borrowing cost, or which is the interest expense that we actually incurred on that specific borrowing. So kung pila gyud to, multiply na to ang interest rate with the utang nga na. So that is the actual borrowing cost, and you deduct any investment income earned on specific borrowing if in case the money was temporarily invested para mo-earn. So you're going to deduct that from the interest expense. So this would be the borrowing cost that is eligible for capitalization, or in other terms, this is the capitalizable borrowing cost. So ang answer ani, ma-add ni mo na siya sa cost sa building, mana siya inventory, or sa qualifying asset. Okay? Another scenario would be, what if the financing is through general borrowing? So, saan mo po ng general borrowing? So, these are the borrowings that are obtained for more than one purpose. For example, the acquisition or construction of a qualifying asset and some other purposes. So, meaning, pag pangutang nila dito sa bangko, wala nila gi-designate na nga para lang yun na siya sa qualifying asset. So, naa siya other purposes other than to acquire or construct a qualifying asset. So, the formula here in general, so this is the formula, average expenditure times the capitalization rate, and you will get the borrowing cost on general borrowings. Okay, so This one, to get the capitalization rate, so that is obtained by dividing the total interest expense on general borrowings by the total general borrowings. So you need to compute the interest expense again on general borrowings and then divide it by the total general borrowings. So that's your capitalization rate, and this capitalization rate will be multiplied by the average expenditure on the asset to get the borrowing cost eligible for capitalization, or this is the capitalizable borrowing cost. The amount computed in the formula shall be compared with the actual borrowing costs incurred during the period. The amount to be capitalized would be the lower amount. Di ba naaman tayo gi-compute ali? Kani siya, i-multiply nimo siya sa actual, i-compare nimo na siya sa actual interest on the borrowings, and whichever is lower, mao na siya imuhang i-add sa imong qualifying asset. Okay? What if the borrowing is both specific and general? So in such a case, the capitalizable borrowing cost is computed on both the specific and the general borrowings. In this regard, we'll take a look at two different computation. There is the average, there are two methods on how to compute for this one. There's the average accumulated expenditure method. That is a traditional approach, and we have the avoidable interest method, or the contemporary approach. So for the first one, we need to compute the specific borrowing, and we will follow the template ganiha, di ba? Mamani siya tong template ganiha, interest minus investment income. So that's for the specific borrowing. Then we're going to compute for the general borrowing. So average expenditure less specific borrowing, and then expenditures financed by general borrowing multiplied by the capitalization rate, and you'll get the borrowing cost from the general borrowing. Then you add the two, and you will get the total borrowing cost. So again, the amount computed in the formula is compared with the actual borrowing cost incurred during the period. The borrowing cost to be capitalized is the lower amount. If we're using the contemporary method, same rule, lower amount ang gamiton. So that would be interest expense minus investment income. So the same siya ani. And then ani sa general borrowing, you have the average expenditures times the capitalization rate. You will get the borrowing cost from the general borrowing, and you will get the total. So add both. So ang iyahang kalahian ani would be nawa diri tong less specific borrowing for this formula. Okay? If we're using the contemporary approach. Then, what if the specific borrowing is used for general purposes? Diba ganiha na to two types? So, specific borrowing meaning ang pagpangutang nimo sa bangko, niingon ka nga, this is for the qualifying asset. Pag general borrowing, so this is a borrowing that's intended for qualifying and other usage or other purpose. What if ang specific borrowing nga atong giutang para unta sa qualifying asset kay nagamit siya for general purpose? So, when a portion of a specific borrowing is used for purposes other than the acquisition of a qualifying asset, only the interest pertaining to the expenditures that is made on the qualifying asset net of investment income will be capitalized. So, dili tanan nga interest expense adto nga pagpangutang i-capitalize nimo kay dili man tanan nagamit sa qualifying asset. So, in effect, the specific borrowing would be treated as a general borrowing. And then, how do we present the qualifying assets. So they are not segregated from other asset, meaning you cannot find a line item nga nakabutang dito nga qualifying asset because once for example, the building is completed, it will be recorded as building. So debit to building siya. Dili siya nimo i-record as qualifying assets. So again, it's not segregated from other assets in the FS, and they are presented as regular assets under normal classification as provided under other standard. If you like this video, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be updated with the latest video lessons. Thank you for watching.